Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 379 of Humanity Rising. This is our final week of 2021 before we take a break for the holidays and go into a phase of hearth and home, and we'll be reconvening on Wednesday, January 5th, on the other side of New Year's. As I indicated yesterday, this week we want to begin to reflect on 2021. It's been an epic year, and there are some themes and truths that I think are apparent in ways that we need to just note. And I think the tonality that I would like to strike today on December 7th is the importance of inner regeneration. I think it's clear to all of us now, after 18 months of the pandemic, just bearing in mind that it was in March 11th, 2020, that the World Health Organization officially declared the pandemic. And that all of us have been bearing witness to a world unable anywhere to satisfactorily deal with a little tiny virus that is challenging us in ways that no disease has ever challenged the human race, putting us on alert, in lockdown, social distancing, all kinds of vaccinations, and now boosters. And yet the virus persists. And what has been manifest in our world everywhere is a heightened stress, a deepening awareness of a fundamental disequilibrium in not only the body politic of humanity, now infected by a plague, but in the outer environment, as simultaneously with a unending pandemic, we've come to realize that we are in code red. That we are now in a movement of the ecosystem of the planet that in an accelerating velocity is spinning out of control, and all around us we're witnessing and experiencing all kinds of ecological turbulence. And in this outer and physical inner tension and volatility and chaos and ambiguity, where is truth in chaos? The challenge for all of us as individuals, as community, is to somehow be able to track the vector of coherence. Because it's only coherence in chaos that is capable of discerning truth, mobilizing equilibrium of soul, and navigating a course that is capable of thriving on the chaos all around. And that's the regeneration of the heart, the regeneration of the soul, the coherence of the deep interior. So today we're going to explore what it really means to develop inner regeneration. And we're going to turn to one of the greatest mystical poets of history, Kabir, who lived in 15th century India, but wrote such spellbinding poetry and song that, like Jalaluddin Rumi and others, resonates through time and can give succor to all of us in our current situation. So that's our program today, and we're going to welcome Andrew Harvey, the great mystical translator of Kabir and author and mystical romantic, I would say, who I've known for a very long time. But before we do, Andrew, why don't you just open up for us just a moment of heart coherence today, as before we dive into the deep well of Kabir. Just give us a moment from you and your heart of coherence.
Let me read you a poem of Kabir. Let me read for you what I feel to be the core of the transmission of Kabir. I've just published a book called Engoldenment with 366 new translations of Kabir, and it's out today. It's from Amazon. And I'm very honored to be with you, because for me, creating this book has been one of the sublime joys of my life, and offering it to everyone at this moment when Kabir is speaking directly to us in our chaos is a huge honor for me. But I'd like to read you what I think is the poem of our time. O Swan, think carefully about what I say. The three worlds, the million species, all live and suffer in darkness. Be wise and cherish the rare grace of human birth. Strive fiercely to realize the one. Devotion's the only source of joy. Without devotion, pain eats all things. The love of the one's the only honey. The rest is a heap of poison. To be absorbed in God is the one transforming work. All other pursuits end in grief and harm. Truth, says Kabir, is what's immutable. What comes and goes, what shifts and dies, is false. You've loved the false for so many lives. Kali's night is coming, and thunder. Fly through the storm to the real. Kabir knew in the 15th century that humanity was beginning the dark night that would bring it to the moment when it'd have to choose between transfiguration or extinction. He knew that, and his whole work is born out of that tragic and amazing knowledge. And that's why I've spent the last 5 years quietly working on him, so that he can now be available to us at the moment when his voice can offer us the greatest possible clarity, the greatest possible warning, and the greatest possible encouragement. He is a prophet as well as a poet, and the time for his return is now. There are two great universal mystical poets, and I've spent 40 years with one of them, Rumi, and the other one, who is the Everest, really, of mystical poets, is Kabir. And it's time to hear him. And I'd like to read you one more, because this is the old Kabir. And since I'm about to be 70, I rather identified with this. Kabir is old now. His voice is hoarse from shouting and pleading. For as long as he lets me, I'm going to stand at this street corner in Kali Yuga's burning rain, crying out, just in case there's anyone who still has heart ears to hear the truth. Kabir's old now, and whatever illusions he had have all burnt down. Nothing remains but truth and this voice. O world, listen while you still can. The dark woman's dancing, and each time her foot pounds down, millions will die. So when Jim is talking about inner coherence, what Kabir means by inner coherence is direct knowledge of reality, direct understanding through initiation by the beloved of the nature of reality. When Jim is talking about inner regeneration, he's pointing to what we need most at this moment. We need to attend to the science of inner regeneration that you will only find in the great mystics, who are both, as Jim called me, a romantic, but also supreme realists of reality. They have the strength to face reality exactly as it is, because they are one with the mystery of the alchemy of reality at all moments. And what I've discovered over the 40 years of my path is that the very great mystics are the great scientists of regeneration. They are the ones who know how to connect us with the depths of ourselves in whatever situation we find ourselves. And they are also the ones that understand the true meaning of this vast apocalyptic crisis that we are in, because they know from their own inmost experience of having died into life that the very great terrible death that we are living through could also potentially be the birth canal of a new embodied humanity, an embodied divine humanity, because they have lived it themselves. Rumi died and became whatever he became to pour out thousands of mystical poems. Kabir died to go through the engoldenment process that is the title of my new book. And I believe that what is happening at the deepest level can only be understood in terms of a mutation, an evolutionary mutation of humanity. One kind of humanity is going to die because it is simply absolutely bankrupt. It cannot deal with the horrific problems that its hubris, its craziness, its narcissism, its addiction to power have created. It's over for that humanity. But the way in which the mystery is working is that out of savage grace, savage mercy, it's allowing the very crisis itself to manifest extremely enough to create the unspeakably harsh conditions that are necessary for a mutation. So God is nothing if not paradoxical. And this is what Kabir knows. And why it is, I believe, essential for every spiritual seeker to get with Kabir is that if you do, you'll find three things that will really make clear to you the lineaments of this science of inner regeneration. You'll find first an absolutely unflinching vision of the absolute chaos and horror that the human ego is in. And we need that, because if anyone is in any doubt that the human full self is now bankrupt and lethal to itself, to the creation, to the animals, to the seas, then they are blind. And being blind in a time like this is not going to be of any help at all. The second thing that you'll find in Kabir, which is so momentously encouraging, is that Kabir is the only supreme mystic of humanity that just says it clearly. He says we have to go beyond all religion, all dogma. They've all been costume parties. They've all been man-made. All mystical systems, we have to go into a direct, naked, humble relationship with the one beyond any kind of understanding or formulation. We just have to surrender so that the one can teach us out of the one's infinite mercy how to negotiate the appalling situation that we have created for ourselves. And if you don't realize the truth of that and the truth of the surrender of all of our fantasies of our power and our knowledge at this moment, when it's quite clear that even the most exalted kinds of knowledge, whether scientific or so-called spiritual, are failing, you won't get how merciful that vision of Kabir's is. He's saying, cut the crap, burn down the mosques, burn down the temples, get rid of caste, get rid of lineage, get rid of dogma. Trust that you are a hologram of the one, and by surrender and passionate devotion, find that out, and it will change everything. And the third thing that goes to the heart of why mystics like myself revere Kabir in the way that musicians and composers revere Bach as the unapproachable, majestic one, the one that everything is judged by, is that Kabir knew from his own experience that the death of Kali Yuga, this horrifying waking up to humanity, wasn't only an appalling experience, it was also a necessary experience, because it burnt down all the illusions that separated you from the one, made you finally humble enough to turn to the one. And what you're rewarded by, as Kabir makes clear, is the starting of a wholly new process of radiant, radical, regenerative embodiment, the birth of the divine human, which he calls engoldenment. This is the key for me of what's going on. We're not being asked now merely to go through a transformation. Transformation wouldn't be nearly enough. It's like having leukemia and taking aspirin. It's not going to work. We're not being asked even to go through transfiguration, which would be wonderful. We're actually being asked to go through a mutation. We're in the stage that the caterpillar gets into in the cocoon when it dissolves completely in absolute anxiety and bewilderment, and begins to see the miracle of the imaginal cells awakening in it to form a body which is completely unimaginable to it, a wholly new way. Kabir knew that because he lived it, and his poetry is the guide to all the scientific stages of that process. Because there's a difference between Rumi and Kabir. Rumi is gorgeous and aristocratic and infinitely rich. Kabir has boiled away everything except truth. He's speaking with a scalded, seared, naked, absolutely honed laser-like voice. There's no time for the gorgeous anymore. What's needed is the science. What is, what needs to be known, what cannot be known, what has to be done, and what, if it's done, is possible. So that's why I am so thrilled to be appearing with my friend and my brother Jim, because I have been challenging all the teachers, all the major teachers, to step up and do what Jim is doing. Jim has always understood that we were in an apocalyptic situation. He was the only person I met when I woke up to it 20 years ago who really, really got it. And he poured his whole life out to try and help. I am absolutely appalled by the lack of courage of the spiritual teachers. Many of them know behind closed doors just how terrible things are. And many of them are clear about it, but they won't talk about it because they won't risk their income streams. They won't risk their empires. They won't risk alienating people. They're still playing in the corrupt and rotten and burning bazaar of spiritual celebrity. And it is absolutely time now that every significant person and person with a voice and every teacher gets up and says to the human race two things. This is a global dark night, and that doesn't mean a trauma. That doesn't mean a crisis. It's not like bankruptcy or losing a lover or even losing a child, terrible though that is. This is the potential extinction of the human race and the whole of nature, and it's coming potentially far faster than even people like Jim and I, who were very awake to it, knew. It's coming far faster. That's the first thing that every significant person who understands anything should be saying to the human race. And the second thing I believe that they should be saying is, do not despair. Do not panic. Go to the deepest level of your being. Use as your guides the very greatest mystical teachers, because they are the supreme realists. They are the supreme scientists of inner regeneration. And in a crisis like this, hugging trees is good. Running and keeping yourself healthy is, of course, wonderful. And doing all kinds of marvelous psychological modalities to deal with your anxiety is necessary. But none of that is going to hack it. The only thing that could possibly hack it is enlightenment, is waking up in the depths of yourself to the deathless in you and working calmly and steadily with great focus from that deathless self, giving up the fruits of action and relinquishing any fantasy that you understand where this will end up, because the reality is there is no one on this earth who knows where this is going. But there are people on the earth who know how to go to wherever this is going. So this is very serious stuff, my friends. That's why I worked when COVID broke. I knew I might die because I have very weak lungs and I'm over 65. So, and I wasn't, quite honestly, dying holds no terrors to me. It's living that holds the terrors now. I wasn't afraid of dying. I just thought, well, if I am going to die, what would I like to give as my last gift to humanity? What would I really like to offer? And I knew it would be Kabir. I knew that if I had anything to give, it would be this vision that Kabir had given me. What happened was that I've done two books. I did Turn Me to Gold first, And that arose out of 4 years I spent during one of my periodic fits of bankruptcy in a hut in Arkansas, alone with my cats and surrounded by fields and visited by deer. And I worked with Kabir in a way that I've never worked with anything. He came and I lived with him. And I felt possessed by him. And extraordinary things would happen. I would translate a poem and rework it, and then the experience in the poem would happen. So I knew I wasn't making this up, that this was my task, to have the courage to really hone myself, to be able to receive some small part of the absolutely burning clarity of what he is. And when COVID came, I knew that what I had to do was to go into total silence and close my door and translate a whole year's set of poems so that the human race, if they wanted it, could have Kabir to accompany them for every single day of the year. So they'd have a reminder of the purity, the precision, the clarity, the fierce, passionate devotion, the humility, the extraordinary suffering, and the extraordinary possibility that this time is offering us. And thank God I lived, and the book's out today. And I am so overwhelmed with joy and so humbled that I've been given the privilege to serve him, the great king, the one who really, really is speaking without any mask to us. So, can I read you another one, and then perhaps I'll come down off Mount Olympus? But it's so.
Please. And also, Andrew, I think people would appreciate you telling the story of Kabir. I think many people probably have heard his name, but aren't quite as familiar as you are, obviously, to his depth. So read some poems and tell us the story.
Well, of course, we'll never know the real story, because the real story is only known between Kabir and God. The real story of the life of any great mystic is entirely hidden from the world. And God protects that story under the wings of majesty, as Sham says. But the story that we can know is something like this. He was born probably in 1440, that's the latest date scholar thinks, and died in 1518. And he was born as the child of very poor Muslim weavers in the holiest of all Hindu cities, Benares. So he was born, like Jesus was born, to poor people on the margins of society, on the edge of destitution, open to persecution. So from the very earliest moment of his life, he was born to experience the agony of samsara, of illusion. No privileges protected him. But it's clear that in his childhood and in his early teens, he began to understand that the only way forward was towards divine reality. And there are many stories, most of them improbable, about his evolution. Some people say that he got through a trick, a Hindu guru, to become his guru. A Hindu guru would never accept a Muslim, but he got this Hindu guru to accept him. And there's another story that he also had a Sufi guru. What I believe happened was that in his late 20s, Kabir woke up completely and realized that both Hinduism and Islam were limited versions of the absolute limitless truth that he had been woken up to. And what happened then is that he alienated everybody, which is one of the reasons I love him so much, is that he just stood up in the glory of this realization and said to the Hindus, are you kidding me? You're claiming to represent God, and you're talking about people being untouchable. Are you insane? And he said to the Muslims, you're talking about God, and all you do is go up those minarets and shout and scream, and then go and slaughter animals for your table. Kabir was, even more than St. Francis, someone who understood that killing animals and our treatment of animals was something that would seal our doom if we didn't stop it. He was outraged at what we were inflicting on the animal race. And what happened was that both Hindus and Muslims in different ways tried to kill him. There are some legends which say they tried to kill him 25 times, because imagine what it would be for a Muslim, poor Muslim weaver, which he was by then, with getting up in the middle of Benares, clearly awake, saying that the whole cash cow of Benares, which is entirely about how you organize religion to make you powerful and rich, it sounds familiar in the New Age, was absolute garbage and preventing all human beings from getting to their direct relationship with God. They tried to kill him 25 times. And there's this wonderful story that the king heard about him, the king of Benares, and thought, well, this must be a very, very interesting guy. I'm going to see him before I do what they want me to do, which is basically get rid of him. So he invites Kabir to the palace. Kabir turns up, and the king likes him and says to him, what have you got to say to me? And Kabir says, if you don't understand that royalty is a complete fiction, and that if you do not play this role of king to serve absolutely everyone with total humility, your next incarnation will be as a toad or a dog. So get with the program. And the king loved it. He said, wow, finally somebody is telling me the truth. And he really, the real king spoke to the false king, and the real king said the truth, and the king said, I'll protect you. I love you. I don't understand you, but I know you are holy, and nobody will do anything to you so long as I'm around. So they couldn't get rid of him. And over the next years, he started to sing these astounding poems. He didn't write them. He went into calm, steady, sober ecstasy, and he sang them to a little lute instrument that he carried. And his heart friends, who became hundreds of thousands, people flocked to him. But they weren't the holy rollers, and they weren't the pundits, and they weren't the intellectuals. They were the cigarette sellers and the dancers and the prostitutes and the broken, just as they were with Jesus. They knew that he was real, and they knew that he loved them, and they knew that he would never accept money. He lived as a poor weaver all his life. He could have been very rich, like so many of the modern gurus, but he refused. He lived like them. And one story gets really Kabir's whole essence, and it's such a fabulous story. The myth of Benares is that if you die in Benares, you're going to get liberated. So you can do anything. You can be a child rapist or a serial killer, but as long as you burnt in Benares, Shiva will liberate you. And Kabir used to say, yeah, right, you really believe this horseshit? You really believe this? So when it came for him to be dying, he said, I'm not going to die in this rotten old place. I've spent my life here trying to get some sanity into all of this. I'm going to die in a place called Magaha, which is 120 kilometers from Benares. Now that's a joke, because Magaha was the place which the Hindu text said that if you died in Magaha, you'll be born as a dog or a snake or a donkey. It's the worst place on earth to die. So Kabir, his last bitch slap to this whole circus of illusion was to say to his disciples, you've got to take me to Magaha. We're going. Now, and they did. And he died in Magaha. But it gets better. Because while he was dying, Hindus turned up, because by now he was the most famous living mystic in India, and said, he's ours, and started claiming Kabir as theirs. And so did Muslims. They turned up and said, he's ours. And his whole teaching had been about, none of this is real. Go directly to the one. So on his deathbed, they were about to kill each other. There was going to be a riot over who was going to get Kabir's body, who was going to get the kudos and the prestige and the cash and the power, the usual rubbish of being Kabir's people, when the world was his people. So he smiled, left his body, and his body transformed into one half red flowers, red roses for the Sufis, they love red roses, and gold, marigolds for the Hindus, they love marigolds. So the flowers were distributed, they all hugged each other, and the riot was ended. And if you go to Magaha today, you'll see a little beautiful mosque where you'll see Kabir's sandals, the most moving thing in the world, just a poor man's sandals. And you'll see next to the mosque a Hindu temple. And those people, I spent many days in Magaha, and they love each other. He has united in the core of India the two forces that have caused so much pain and suffering in India. So that's just a taste of what Kabir was. But the courage,
yeah,
extraordinary. This is the sword of God. This is the sword of truth. This is somebody like Shams of Tabriz at that level, or Jesus. In fact, the only person I can compare Kabir to is Jesus, because they both have this absolutely naked, fierce courage, this unbelievable daring of being, and this majesty that refuses to sell the truth short and doesn't mind about what people say about them or even about dying, because they know who they are and what God has given them to do, and they just do it. The story goes on because what happened after Kabir's death was that his poems spread among Hindus everywhere, and his poems spread among Muslims everywhere. So every Hindu knows Kabir and every Muslim reveres Kabir, and it gets better. When the Sikh Guru, first Sikh Guru, came to compile the Sikh scriptures, he put 300 of Kabir's poems into the core of the scriptures, because he said, this is the voice of God. So you have, this is India's greatest poet. He's a universal poet. Every religion in India sanctifies him. But if you go to India, you'll find something wonderful. Of course, the priests know, and the pundits by now know, because it helps them get gigs, you know. But the people who love Kabir, they're the boatmen on the Ganges. They're the people who burn the dead. They're the untouchables. They're the cigarette sellers. They're the people who know that this was their guy. And he spoke to them not in Sanskrit, but in the Hindi of the streets. They know that he is their friend. And that, to me, is the highest imaginable praise. I never forget going in Benares to buy some soap in the early morning at my favorite little shop, which had this old woman, tiny shop, dirty shop, shabby shop. This wonderful old woman, very wrinkled. And she was singing. And I said, "What are you doing? Who are you singing?" And she said, "That's what I've been singing. I'm singing Kabir." And I said, "Why do you love Kabir?" And she looked at me as if I was crazy. And she said, "Kabir was one of us. He knows what we go through. And he knows that God is going through it with us. And he knows that we are divine. And he gives us the simple instruction that can help us not just bear the lives that we have to live, because nothing is going to change my life, but to know that I am God living this life has absolutely made me able to live it with joy." What more could you possibly say about a human being? So that's why Kabir means everything to me. Because I think we're so used to, there are two types of beauty in mystical poetry. There's the gorgeous type, and there's the stark type. And Rumi, of course, has both, but he leads with the gorgeousness, and thank God, because it's so astounding and enchanting. Kabir has nothing to do with the gorgeousness. Kabir leads with the naked bone truth. And there's something terribly shocking, but when you get used to being terribly shocked by a real person, you get famished for that beauty, and you realize that that's the beauty you can't live without. You cannot live without the beauty of Everest stark against a completely stainless blue sky. That's it. And that's why Kabir is so important for us, because he's not going to flatter you. He's not going to tell you you're special. He's not going to tell you that you're uniquely gifted. None of that matters to him. The only thing that matters to him is, are you real? Do you know? Have you died into life? Have you truly, truly humbled yourself and surrendered to the mystery, which you will never understand, of the beloved? And are you prepared to go through all the ordeals necessary to become what you're meant to be, a divine human being? All other questions for him are completely idiotic and have nothing to do with the reality that he's one with. And I think our spiritual world is so corrupt and so filled with fake blandishment and fake teaching and marzipan mysticism that what we need is this sword of calm fire to cut through all of it and give us the skinny, just as that wonderful old woman in Benares got the skinny from Kabir. I need it terribly, and I believe you need it terribly. We all need it terribly. It's time to hear the truth, unvarnished, unflattering, with all its naked power, and to fall in love with the beauty that will destroy us to rebirth us.
That's such a powerful insight of that woman, Andrew, that she knew she couldn't change her fate, but she could change the way she experienced her fate by understanding that what she was living was what God was living through her. Exactly. And that's what gave her joy. That's one of the most extraordinarily powerful insights I think I've ever heard about the true nature of reality.
When we talk about everybody blah, blah, blah about oneness.
Yeah.
But oneness is oneness with everything. Oneness is oneness with chaos, horror, terror, madness, everything. If you wake to the one, you wake to the whole enchilada at the same time. So you're just as much one with the one if you are destitute and dying at the side of the road. That's the one too. And if you have done the work to one yourself and had the grace, then horrible though that is, that horror also is recognized as divine. It's not excluded. You can live it from within its own core of deathless peace. And that's what we need to learn, because we really don't know. You and I talk a lot about radical regeneration, and I believe with my whole heart that it is possible. You believe with your whole heart that it is possible. Why would you be devoting your life to doing this, and why would I? But we both know that it could end in absolute horror. And it might. And we need a vision of reality that fortifies us peacefully for even that. Mm. Even that. We need really what Jesus had in himself on the crucifixion, and we need what Kabir had in himself to go through his absolutely unspeakable and amazing life. There's nothing else that can help us. And if we find that through the science of inner regeneration, there's a chance that we can do amazing things through the divine grace that's poured into us. But as long as we have superficial understandings of what regeneration is and work with modalities that are wonderful but useless in this forest fire, we're not going to get there. We need to get absolutely down to the wire and absolutely real. We need to die into life so that if the great death happens, we will be alive in it and through it and beyond it. Mm. That's real regeneration, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We are not alone.
No.
We are not.
We're not alone, and we are holograms of God. He's saying you're not. That's why he went beyond the vision of enlightenment. Enlightenment is 101 to Kabir. You wake up, that's great. You see the divine reality. But that's not the end of the path. The path is to become a living hologram of divine reality. And that means the transformation of the mind, the heart, the soul, and the body. And this is known as the great secret in all of the mystical traditions, that there is a process that goes beyond enlightenment that actually engoldens the whole being. And he lived as that kind of being to give us, at the moment when this process is happening on a global scale, the guide to it. How amazing.
Well, in this spirit, dear Andrew, let's turn to some poetry.
Yes.
And if there's some poems that you want to draw forth, I
would love
your
to
book
read.
last night, and I picked a couple, but would love to just hear you read.
I want you to pick it. No, I want you to.
Well, I was struck by August 22nd.
August 22nd.
May I ride on the waves of doubt like a straight flying arrow. May I fly on the winds of longing towards the one of whom I dare not speak, but hide in riddles without saying his name. And I was struck by that because that feels to me the poem of the pandemic. You know, we're riding on all these waves of doubt, but we need to do it flying straight as an arrow.
Wow, yes.
And underneath that is our longing towards the one of whom I dare not speak, but hide in riddles without saying his name. I found that poem completely arresting, and it stayed with me throughout the day and was one of my first thoughts this morning. So I wanted to have your commentary on this straight arrow in the waves of doubt. And
well, I think you've said it perfectly, but I think there's something even more astonishing in those last two lines, especially if you relate it to our global dark night crisis. I think when he says, may I fly on the winds of longing towards the one of whom I dare not speak, I think what he's pointing out to us at this moment is that we are now facing God as destroyer, the majesty and terror of Kali, this force that we thought we could domesticate, that we could use, that would nourish us and spoil us like entitled babies, but which has turned out to destine us for a dark night that will either burn us to the ground or remake us, but nothing in between. So when he says, of whom I dare not speak, it's because he is overwhelmed by the sacred terror of realizing just how absolute the absolute is, and how demanding and how rigorous and how astounding. And all the names burn in that bewilderment before the majesty of what we're living through. That's what I think takes us to the next level in that poem, because when you really sit in the middle, as you do, I know, because we have our wonderful afternoon talks and late night talks when we talk very nakedly to each other, I know how much you suffer what is really happening. And when you really do, we all go into, if we're honest, a state of total bewilderment at the absolute ferocity of what's really happening. But the mystic can turn that bewilderment through grace into radical awe. And I think of that extraordinary phrase in the Requiem Mass set by Mozart, when the choir cries out, Rex Tremendi Majestas, is King of tremendous majesty. When you see what is being manifested in this destruction dance, Shiva's Tandava dance, you fall to the ground, both in terror and in awe. And that's what I mean. He means, I think, towards the one of whom I dare not speak. And I think that gives the poem a sort of definitive beauty for our time. What's the other one that you chose? To choose another one. That's I would never have thought you'd choose that one. How wonderful that you chose that one.
Well, the other one that I was struck by, it was May 10th. And just to remind everybody, this is one poem a day that Andrew's put together in his book Engoldenment, which I urge all of you to order on Amazon so we can make it a bestseller. Because it reminded me of Eliot's Four Quartets. You know, they don't even know the town's name. So how on earth could they ever get there? For eons now, they've been walking but failing to arrive at the town that's always been right here. And the end of all of our exploration is to arrive at where we started and to know the place for the first time. So that was a beautiful little nugget for me that made me chuckle at the obviousness of the here and now and how long it takes to get there.
But it's also, it is that. There's something that goes to the real core of Kabir's work. And that is, he woke up to the original source in its fullness. No words, no dogmas, direct naked relationship of the one in you to the one in the whole of reality. That was what our ancestors in ancient China, in the indigenous tribes, that's what they knew. They knew that. They lived that. They lived the totally naked, natural, simple life of that. And when he's saying they don't even know the town's name, of course, they've got thousands of names in all the religious systems for the town. Nirvana, God knows what, right? But it has no name because it's like the Tao that can be named is not the Tao. There is no name because it's right here, right now, always in everything as everything. And how could you name that? So the desire to name anything is itself a confession of having fallen away from that original clarity and union, which is our true reality. And that's the nameless reality out of which he's speaking. That's what has forged him to forge this voice for us. He's like Lao Tzu on steroids or Chuang-Tzu on steroids. He has that kind of absolute naked natural clarity. Can I read you one about the engoldenment process? This is so beautiful.
Please.
You know, there are a lot of people in the New Age, the so unnew New Age, that are talking about the new human. And many of them make you believe that if you go to 3 of their seminars or go into their machines or whatever they're cooking up, that you'll be divinized. This is just the latest version of spiritual materialism. It has nothing to do with the reality of the true evolutionary process, which requires a dark night, a dissolution of the false self, infinite suffering, devotion, ecstasy, and revelation to be even barely possible. So let's get absolutely real about that. And this is why this vision of engoldenment that Kabir is giving is so important, because it's absolutely without any kind of flattery. It's not saying to you, you can have this in 3 weeks, or by going to an intensive where you'll be hooked up to some machine. This is saying to you, you're going to have to change your whole perspective on life. You're going to have to devote yourself absolutely to the one, and you're going to eventually have to die into reality, and you're going to have to trust that that death will put you in the stream of a process which you cannot possibly understand, but which will transfigure you and mutate you. That's what you're going to have to do. I've done it, he's saying, and it works through the grace of the beloved, and you've got to do it. I can't do it for you, but I can show you the wonder and the amazement of what happens if you're sincere and authentic enough to just get over yourself and stop choosing any false solutions and work with the beloved directly. And this is what happens. And it's such a great poem. And it's only 4 stanzas. And this is the moment when you wake up to being the beloved of the beloved, engolden in heart, mind, soul, and body, in an amazement without end. This is the moment when you know that the birth is real. Conch, gong, trumpet, hear them thrilling through the divine palace of your body, as at long last, you merge with your eternal husband. Let love's mad joy surge through your whole being in wave after wave. This is what you were born for, and this is what you died to live. And it's perfect, because as you grow on the mystical path, you hear different sounds, and Kabir knew that. Any adept knows that the infinite creates through sound. And as profound awakening comes closer, the sounds become more gorgeous. Conch, gong, trumpet, that's the divine music that is creating reality. Hear them thrilling through the divine palace of your body. I love the fact that he doesn't say divine temple of your body. He says palace, because you're born royal when you're born in golden. You're not just holy, that's wonderful, but you're royal as God is royal. You're a hologram of the royalty of God, like Kabir was. Conch, gong, trumpet, hear them thrilling through the divine palace of your body. And so beautiful that Kabir isn't talking about his experience. He's saying, this is for you. This is what you can live. This is what will happen to you if you really listen to what I'm trying to tell you. And I'm not speaking in poetry, I'm speaking in scientific clarities in poetry to inspire you to take this path. And if you do the work and grace blesses you and you die into life, then the conch and the gong and the trumpet will thrill through the divine palace of your transfigured in golden body, and you'll rise as a royal, humble, divine human being. That's what you will become. And you won't need titles, you won't need dignities, you won't need to be adored, you won't need to be some wretched guru. You will be you. You'll be free, and you'll be free in mind, heart, soul, and body, complete. And then he goes on, as at last, after all of these reincarnations, after all of these philosophies that are half true and mostly garbage, after all of these fancy disciplines and twirling your rosary and wearing red on your thing, all of that costume party, as at long last, after you've burnt through all of that and taken the real path, as at long last, you merge with your eternal husband. For Kabir, the human being is always feminine, a woman, because the divine is the majesty of the eternal, unshakable one, the one that can never be named. And in his cosmology, you have to become, in every part of yourself, utterly receptive and utterly surrendered, as a woman who is in love with a man is absolutely surrendered to him in adoration. This is immensely radical, but it's the key to the process, because you cannot be engoldened without absolute, rapturous, adoring surrender to the total power of the one who engoldens. You just can't. So the great orgasm of engoldenment can only happen between the sacred masculine and the sacred feminine through that adoration. And that's what he's saying. So at long last, you merge with your eternal husband. You merge. It's not that you melt into. That's very subtle. If you're melting into, you just drown. No, you merge. So you and that merges, and something new is born from that merger. The new divine human, the resurrected Christ. And then he describes what happens at this moment. For love's mad joy, let love's mad joy surge through your whole being, from the bottom of your toes to the top of your head and all around you, and in every awakening cell of you, and in every bone and in every marrow of your bone, the whole being, not just this heady Buddhist or Hindu enlightenment in the head and everything else is illusion. No, everything is surged by these waves of ecstatic awakening. Birth. And then he just turns and says to the human race, this is what you were born for. And if we get through to this, that's what he'll be saying to us. He'll be at the other end of this appalling birthing process, wherein, with his hands on his hips, wearing his dhoti, saying, this is what you were born for. You arrived, you got through. Grace got you through. And this is what you died in the dark night of the human race to live. This is what the dark night is there for. To kill you and me, to strip us of all of our pretensions, to humble us, to make us surrender to the one with no agenda, so that the one can reveal what no agenda could ever prepare us for, because we're literally the unimaginable, the birth of the real divine human. And so I thought I'd end with this other poem. And may this be all of our poems. What's important to understand, I think, Jim, is that although Kabir placed and expressed this vision more simply and eloquently and nakedly and directly than anybody has ever done in the history of human mysticism, it's not his vision alone. It's at the heart of the Kabbalah. It's at the heart of Vajrayana mysticism. It's the heart of authentic mystical Christianity. Because if you study these different traditions, you realize that for many, many, many centuries, the real secrets have been kept back because they're too outrageous. And the real secret is always that there will be a huge evolutionary horror which will decide whether or not humanity lives. And what will decide is if enough people know that the horror has been given for the mutation of humanity into divine humanity and are prepared to go through this unspeakable suffering, trusting that it is just the preliminary to an absolutely astounding and unimaginable birth. This is what Aurobindo was talking about. This is what Moses de Leon in the Zohar is talking about. This is what the great Shaivite mystics were covering up in riddles, but when you understand the language, you realize they knew it. This is what the Dalai Lama was teaching in secret teachings 3 years ago in Australia when he gave the golden teachings of the Vajrayana to 300 of us, because it's there, and now is the time for it to be released. There is no other solution for this. And it's not a solution, it's a path through whatever happens. And if at the end of it, we come to live this poem, it will have been not only worth it, but how can one say it? We will all feel as Jesus must have felt that morning, that Sunday morning when he woke up, resurrected, alive in a completely new cosmic way, unimaginably new. So here it is. This is only 10 lines because Kabir doesn't go on and on like Andrew. The Lord has shown himself to me within my body. My whole being is cleansed and gleams like pure gold. The goldsmith tests gold on a touchstone. I've been tested and made whole. That's the poem of inner regeneration. The touchstone is the global dark night. Are we going to get its message? Are we going to align with its laws? Are we going to humble up radically? Are we going to surrender all of our pretensions? Are we going to do the bloody work of deep mystical practice and true sacred activism? Are we? If we do, we will be reborn. Even if the world ends, those who do that work now will know birth. The birth will happen, whether the world goes on or not, because the birth is here already. It's happening now. It's happening in our conversation. When has there been this kind of conversation? And it's Kabir's gift to me, to you. This is the gift of being alive at the potential end of humanity, that you get to know the real end of humanity. And I was talking to a priest last night, a great, marvelous man who was the world's leading icon painter. We were talking at 2:00 in the morning. He's an amazing being. And he told me about something that he'd read in an old commentary on Revelations. And this is perhaps where we could end. He said that some English guy, some English pastor had written this incredible commentary on Revelations in 1812 or something, when he'd found it. And he'd saved one line, which he thought was really the absolute truth. it had lived with him all his life. And the line was, and I think you'll hear it at the core of you after all we've been talking about. The line was, wait for it, the end will not be an event. The end will not be an event, but a person. Mm. And of course, the evangelicals meant that, oh, it's Jesus coming back in some Star Wars avatar to save us all. That's not at all what's meant. It means what Kabir means. The end is not an event, but a person, capital P, the engoldened one that you and I are destined in the mind of God to be. How amazing.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you so much. This has been powerful. Let us leave it at that, my friends. The end is not an event. The end is a person. Bye for now. I'll see you tomorrow.